Hello and welcome to the Education on Fire podcast. The place where we share creative and inspiring learning in our schools. Season 1, Episode 6. Hello and welcome back to Education on Fire with me, Mark Taylor. Today I'm delighted to be talking to Kelly Long, who is the host and creator of the Inspiration for Teachers podcast. Hi, Kelly.
Hi, Mark. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. Thanks for inviting me onto your show.
Brilliant. We really wanted to sort of push the idea and sort of support our listeners with the whole concept about community and the support network that they can feel. Not just within their school, but also within the online community. And as a fellow podcaster, I'm a newbie with my first season, and you're a veteran with sort of 70 odd episodes. I thought it'd be really interesting to sort of hear your story and your take on why you started a podcast and the sort of feedback that you've heard from your listeners and how they feel supported and how our listeners could really get some good support and feedback from you.
Yeah, sure. Well, the reason I started my podcast, and this was back in 2012 now, was because I'm a teacher myself. I've been a teacher for over 10 years, and I know how hard we all work. You know, we do an incredible job in the classroom, supporting children in quite difficult circumstances at times. And I just really feel that teachers need the best support that they can possibly receive. And as a group of really motivated individuals that teachers are, they're quite good at searching out the needs that they have. And with the online community and the power of things like Twitter and podcasting and Facebook, those communities now exist for teachers. So it doesn't necessarily have to be that you receive training in a traditional format, which is in a school environment. You can now go out there and you can search for that information that you are seeking, and you can guarantee that there is somebody out there that is willing to give you that advice and that support. And the great thing about a podcast, and the reason why I wanted to do it, is because I thought you could reach so many teachers that experience similar problems, and you could reach out to them and you could provide them with the solutions to the challenges that they're facing. Because we've all been there. We have the solutions, but as our toolbox, we tend to kind of keep them to ourselves. And I think it's a great way to spread advice, to empower teachers, to drive them forward, and really celebrate their successes and what they do.
And what do you find often are some of the concerns and some of the support that teachers need? Is there a sort of a common thread which you hear on a regular basis?
I mean, on my podcast, I tend to cover the main themes that we all tend to encounter. There's always, that teacher-parent relationship. There's always, building independence with students. There's always the old argument about, behavior and managing challenging environments. So all of those common themes, come up time and again, and everybody has a new take on it, or someone's tried and tested it, or there's a new piece of educational research that has been put to the test and has revealed significant gains and new ways of doing it. So I think it's all out there and it's all available. And I just think that those common themes are always going to be there. We're always going to face those challenges, whether you're a new teacher into the profession or whether you're an existing teacher, depending on the circumstances in which you're operating as a provider of education. So those common themes, I think, will always be there depending on where you are in your career. But I think also as we go forward, the educational landscape, as you know, Mark, it always changes. A new political government will come in, they'll have their own agenda. They want to be seen to be, putting their stamp on education. So things do change. So as educators, we have to change with it. But also I think, we have to feel really take control of it, because we are the experts. We know what we're doing. We're highly trained, so we should really feel proud of our profession and very skilled in what we do. And I just think that sometimes you can just need the extra help by going out there and reaching out to communities that exist online to get that extra help that you need, or to feel the confidence to try something new, or to discover what actually is making an impact in education from an educational research point of view.
I think that's very true, and I think they've been able to reach out to a community as not a weakness, but as a sign of strength, just purely in terms of wanting to learn and to grow yourself as a teacher, so that you're then able to support your pupils, I think is a really important one. And like you say, because there are so many different things out there now, especially when you feel safe, like going to a website connected to a podcast, or somewhere that you feel safe, or a Facebook group of people that you know who are there, you can feel like you can answer those questions in a human way, rather than worrying about what someone else thinks from a career point of view, or whether you think you're going to seem silly because you're asking a question that you ought to know. Just, I think those sort of safe environments, I think, are really key. And also, I think if you sort of flip that the other way around, your students often feel exactly the same. They're not sure whether they should know something, or whether they should ask a question, or whether they should seem to be learning, because they think they should know it all already in some respects. So I think actually really feeling what that learning process is like as a teacher, I think is a really important one.
And I think as well, as a teacher, I think it's quite easy to become stagnant in how you teach, because you've been to teaching college, you've got your PGCE, you do your NQT year, your school, if they're a good provider of training, will regularly update your training. But for a lot of teachers, they can be quite isolated. You have a lot of autonomy in the classroom teaching these children day in, day out, but from a personal development point of view, it's quite easy to become quite stagnant in how you do things. But also, there's also lots of research regularly going on to investigate what is the best way of teaching and learning. How do we understand what works effectively and implement it in the classroom without getting caught up in all of the marketing that's existing out there, and the kind of key phrases that get pushed onto us, that actually, do they have an impact in your teaching and in the classroom? So I think it's really important to reach out to these communities, just to keep yourself up to date with what's going on, but also, reignite some of the passion that can, if you've been in the profession for a long time, it can quite easily, slip you by. And I think it's really important to stay on your game, and to stay on your game, you need to keep your finger on the pulse. You need to reach out to others. You need to feel part of that community, so that you do feel supported and not sidelined, because I think a lot of teachers do feel sidelined and not respected, and don't really feel what they once did for the profession. So I think that is a big issue as well, that we need to support teachers in that way.
And I guess as well, it's within a school, you've got a pool of tens of teachers, or I guess maybe 100 or so. But on an online community where you've got hundreds, or if not thousands of people, sometimes there's going to be someone there that maybe has the answer to your question, or be thinking along the same lines as you, that you can sort of make a positive friendship or connection with. That, like you say, can be a positive experience, which is sort of outside of the four walls of your particular school, but still part of your profession, and still have that sort of ignite that passion that you had when you started, and hopefully that you still have, and also give you some ideas where you can develop as well, and where your sort of where your strengths lies, which can be supported by other people, rather than necessarily feeling it might be a negative, if that's kind of the feedback you're getting just with your staff within your school locally, as it were. Just that there's a bigger world out there, and a different way of doing things sometimes.
Absolutely. I mean, the people that I've interviewed on my podcast just alone, I mean, the connections that I've made with them, they're so supportive, and have been really, putting me in the driving seat, and maybe really challenging what I believe about education, and how I should go about teaching. And I've said it before when I've spoken to other people, that, when I'm in a bit of a sticky situation, or I'm, feeling under pressure, or if I'm trying to think in a different way about how I should do my own teaching, I have all of my guests' input in my head, and I'm like, oh, well, how would Mark do this? And how would Dawn approach this situation? And it's good in that sense, because it really makes you feel that it's not just you on your own. You've got that support and people willing to help you. And there are so many people out there that will willingly offer you advice and support. And, without any judgment. And I feel that sometimes, teachers can feel quite judged, and that is not what we want. We want people to feel empowered, to go forward, to really help learners in the classroom, but also develop teachers themselves, because they're an asset and they need to be nurtured.
And also, I think, and the bigger picture is also, like you said, how you come across these people. So that you have the online communities and all that sort of thing, but also how you actually have your content. And I guess the podcast, sort of going full circle now almost, is one of those things. We're sort of learning and we're developing and we're having conversations with people over a podcast, where you can learn as much, if not more, than you would have done just from a textbook or something which is sort of very sort of stationary, really. And this is, as you said, education moves and communities move with it, and a podcast, and I think listening to something orally just has a different way of connecting with you than reading or some of the more traditional ways of finding out information.
Well, I definitely agree with you, Mark, because I started my podcast 2 years ago, and I've regularly been having interview conversations with some fantastic leading educators, and it has really pushed me forward. I mean, not pushing my own boat, but I always thought I was a good teacher before, but it really has pushed some boundaries for me and really opens me up to different ways of thinking about education and teaching. And I think if you can then take that conversation that you've had and express it and give it out to the world, I mean, you can reach so many people through a podcast that, if you were just trying to share this advice locally within your school, it might impact on, maybe 50 to 100 people. But with a podcast, you can reach thousands of people all over the world and have a significant impact. And I just think that is so empowering.
I think it's brilliant. And I think also as a consumer, and now as someone who's actually a creator in terms of this podcast, what I find is it's quite nice to be talking about it with people outside of our normal day-to-day working environment, as it were. So earlier today, for example, I've been teaching drums and percussion all day, and within the confines of my room, and it's quite loud. And by the time I get to sort of mid-afternoon, I think I've really been here quite a long time now. My head's starting to hurt, and then
Need some earplugs.
Exactly. But then sort of having come away, and I've got back into my home life and done all that sort of stuff, and now we're sort of now chatting. I sort of feel rejuvenated, and I'm in a different place and able to talk about it. Whereas if I'd been doing it during my school day, I wouldn't have been necessarily as being receptive as I was then. And I think as a consumer, I listen to podcasts in that same sort of space. It's out of my work environment when I'm feeling fresh, and it might be while I'm out having a walk. I often do it if I'm running, and just when you're sort of more yourself, and then you're more receptive to what you hear. And I think those connections, like you say, just come to you, and then you feel really inspired then to sort of get back on the horse, as it were, if you feel like you've come off it, or if you just need a little bit of a boost just to sort of reignite that fire again.
And I think what it does is it allows you that time to reflect. And I think that is so important because, we all know when you're in the classroom, it's lesson after lesson after lesson, 32, 34 children in a class. And that is hectic. I mean, my husband says to me at the end of every half term, it's like, I can't even speak to you because you're a bit kind of not very talkative and you're not really very responsive. And I'm like, because I've given it my all during a term. So that constant buzz and that expectation and that pressure and the excitement and the thrill of teaching, it can be quite wearing. So putting yourself in a space where you have time to think and time to reflect about your day and how you've done it, and then listening to a conversation or an interview where you can hear how other people are doing it, or feel a personal connection to, yes, that's how I feel, and how would I address the situation. Or sometimes it's just nice for somebody to say, I've been there, I've done that, and this is what you can do if you're in a similar situation, that you can then take those steps and you can implement it in your own environment. And I think that's not only really supportive and helpful, but I think it just gives you that space to really reflect on, how has your day gone? Where can you make improvements? How can you make improvements? And outside that environment, that school environment where you have the time just to think. And most of my listeners, when they're telling me about listening to episodes on my podcast, it's a case of it was when they were in a traffic jam
Yes.
driving to work in the morning. They've listened to it, but then it's inspired them in their day to take action and try something new and think about it. And it has a positive impact. And it's not just on you and I, excuse me, it's not just on you and I or the teaching profession. It has that wider impact. What we do then impacts on the learners in our classroom, and that then spans into their home environment and their parents, and those conversations that go on behind closed doors. That's where you're making that impact. And I think the power of a podcast and an interview conversation is just so reaching, and I think it's really valuable.
I couldn't agree more. And one thing I'd like to just sort of carry on from one of the things you just said is that, like you said, the end of half term or the end of a term when everything just seems like it's been, or the beginning of the term was a long way away. Like I said, there's lots of lessons gone on and lots of emotional input gone in. How do you look after yourself? And I know one of your recent series has been about well-being, and I'm quite keen on the whole side of teachers looking after themselves, partly so that they feel good, which I think is very supportive for their pupils in terms of how that comes across, but also understanding about looking after themselves, I think also gives their pupils something which isn't just about how they might explain to their pupils how they could look after themselves, but just their general energy is something which the pupils then thrive on. And I'd just be interested to know sort of what you do, and also from your sort of previous podcast series, what sort of feedback did you get back along those sort of lines?
Yeah, well, the reason I put that season together was because, teachers are under a lot of pressure. They do give their all. I know what that feels like to give your all, and you really do need to look after yourself. So a lot of that season was about how do you take care of you, mindfulness, exploring, what is acceptable, and also giving you the confidence to say, actually, there is a time and a place for me. And you have to respect those boundaries, and you really have to put them in place. And I know for me that there are certain things that I have implemented in order to protect myself, because being a teacher, that is full on, but also I have a podcast, and as you know, Mark, and you're experiencing, it takes a lot of work to put that together. In addition to that, I've launched an online revision course. So there are lots of things that I do above and beyond being a teacher, and that is quite demanding. And I know that I put that pressure on myself, but it's because I really do feel the drive to help others in our field and to help students learn. And I'm passionate about that, and that's what I really want to do. So that kind of drives the pressure, but I'm quite clear about what I need to do to protect myself. So, I do not make decisions when I'm tired, because that's when you're in that emotional state. You're not thinking quite clearly enough. So, if I'm making decisions in the morning about what I want to do, what action I want to take. I don't make any decisions in the evening. I think also what I try to do a lot of is when you're in that very kind of crazy zone of, teaching, and you're putting in a lot of input, and you're really being very creative about how you are planning your lessons, how you're getting a lot of different children to think very deeply about their content that they're learning. That takes a lot of energy. So you've definitely got to build in time just to sit back from it. And I do that now. There is space that, even if it's just half an hour in the car, just relaxing and not thinking about things and being very mindful about what actions I'm taking and being in the moment. I really try to do that. And I also try to take myself out of the situation, which can be very hard, because when you're in these situations of pressure and demands on your time, and from a teaching point of view, obviously the older you get, you then have kids and you've got family issues going on as well. You've got to be very mindful about protecting yourself, and by taking myself out of the situation, what that tends to do for me is to make me think, actually, these issues that I'm experiencing, or these challenges that I'm experiencing, or the pressure that I'm experiencing, it's not all about me. There are wider issues that are going on. So I try to look at the whole picture and the bigger picture. And by doing that, it allows me to do a number of things. It allows me to realize that actually I'm not the center of the universe. And therefore, the pressure that I'm putting on myself is too high, and therefore I should not be doing it. And also the series of events that may have led up to a feeling of feeling, stressed and overwhelmed, that is not necessarily of my doing. And you very much have to look at what you can control and what steps you can take to make a change. And if you can take control and implement change, I think that is really powerful in giving you the time and the space to think, actually, no, I can't do this right now. This is my time. I need to think about it. And just give yourself that space, that clear space, just to really focus on yourself. And also, I think a lot of teachers, and especially new teachers, they heap a lot of pressure on themselves to be the doer, the giver of everything. And, as you go through your teaching career, that's not how it should be. Yes, you should provide the steps to teach a child and to get them to think very deeply and experience the learning. You should definitely provide that environment, but it's not up to you to get them to take those and further steps. They really need to be thinking for themselves. And I think in your early years, it's all about you and your performance and what you're doing and how you've done it. And I think as you go through your teaching career, you tend to move away from that, because you realize that actually it's the child that needs to be doing this work. And I think that in a sense brings some relief in certain areas, but definitely knowing that you are important. You need to take that time. You need to focus on actually what is creating the stressful environment. What aspects of it can you control and deal with? And that's where you need to focus your energy. And everything else, you've just got to say, I can't do that right now, or I can't influence that in any way. And I think that brings a real sense of reassurance and a sense that you can actually manage a situation more clearly. And I think that's really beneficial.
Yeah, I think that the mindful way of of thinking, and just like you say, you're not responsible for everybody. You're responsible for yourself, and everybody is responsible for themselves. And hopefully, you being true to yourself will give them the inspiration to do what's best for them, and hopefully they take away the experience in the and the learning that you're trying to provide. But like you say, you're not responsible for every single person. You can only help them as best you can and show them what you believe to be important, as well as just the knowledge that you're imparting. And like I say, the rest of it at some point is down to them. And I think once you can separate that out, I think that really is key. And that comes from, I think, your students that you're teaching, and also within your school environment as well. If you find yourself in a situation where you're working with someone which doesn't see teaching or see life the same way as you, it doesn't make them wrong. It just means that they're different, and finding a way of working together and accepting everybody, I guess, is the key. Is really important, I think, for your, like I say, for your health and stability as much as anything else.
One of the things that really sticks in my mind is I did a Women in Educational Leadership series a few episodes back, and one of my guests said to me, when all the hecticness of teaching is going on, sometimes you've just got to do things quick and dirty. And I think sometimes that's, a situation that you can default to and feel comfortable with. And I think knowing that is one way to get you through a situation. So I think there's lots of advice out there, and, you can really reach out to people, and they will support you in the communities that exist online and also within podcasting communities. So I would definitely suggest joining them and being a part of them, because they are really helpful. And also, if you're listening to a podcast, an educational podcast on a regular basis, all of that advice is out there, and people are so willing to give it away. So definitely go and experience it.
I think that's great advice. And the other thing that I just wanted to pick up on from before was what you said about just taking half an hour out for yourself and small snippets of time, because you very often hear people say, I can't wait till the next half term, or can't wait for Christmas holidays or Easter holidays.
It's too long. Too long.
Yeah, it's just too far away. Just knowing that every day you have the chance just to give yourself, even if it's 5 minutes or 10 minutes or half an hour, just the chance to reconnect with yourself. And I just think that regular reconnection just gives you the energy you need just to keep going, and give you the support you need to know that you're in control. And I think that's a little bit kind of where we were going, really. It's about feeling like you've got a certain amount of control, especially in an education environment where you feel a lot of decisions are made for you, that you're sort of part of a bigger machine. But I think to feel like you've really got a chance to have some control of your decisions, and also the amount of energy that you're expending and how you want to come across, I think is absolute key. And feeling you can do that every day, I think, is really a powerful thought.
I mean, the only thing that you can control is yourself. So if that's the one thing that you invest time in, and invest time in nourishing, because it's quite easy to neglect it. And I think that's when we can start developing, mental health issues and feeling stressed, and, perhaps why teachers leave the profession. I think to invest that time in yourself is time well spent.
Absolutely. And one of the other things I'd like to just touch on is just the whole way that we're learning, both in terms of ourselves as teachers, but also the students as well. Because the whole podcasting journey for me is something that I taught myself. It's something through the communities online, through the courses that I took, and the information that I found. Do you think that's a way that schooling is going to actually develop? I wonder whether teachers are going to become much more like a mentor with all these fantastic teachings that are online, and it'll be much more about putting them in the right direction and just allowing them to follow their own creative urges a bit more, but under a safe umbrella and under the guidance of schools, rather than the teacher being just the sort of the giver of content.
Yeah, I definitely think that will happen. I think it will happen more for a teacher quicker and faster, because teachers are very creative. They're willing to explore those online communities, those learning environments. So I think from a teaching point of view, it will happen for a teacher much quicker, because there are already teachers out there developing content. For myself, I've already developed an online revision system, so that content is out there. It exists for parents to buy it for their children. It exists for teachers to use it as an aid in the classroom. So we're more willing to take those risks and explore what online spaces can do from a learning point of view. I think from an educational point of view as a whole, probably take a bit longer for it to catch up, because like you said earlier, we're small cogs in a big wheel. So I think it is going that way, but I just think to have a complete environment where the teacher is just the mentor, I think that's significantly in the future. But I do believe it will happen. And I'm a bit of a geek, so I can see how Star Trek is definitely coming down the line, but I don't think it will happen quickly. But from a teaching point of view, I definitely think that the opportunities are there for teachers to reach more students, to share their skills in a more entrepreneurial way, and develop that content. Because if you think as an educator, you've got all those creative skills, you know how to build content, you know how to really get into the minds of pupils and learners, and know how to break content down. And I think that's a very, very specific skill that not many people have. So if you take that content and you put it online, just think how many more people you can impact on. So from my point of view, since I started this podcasting journey, it's definitely been something that I've begun to explore, because back in Christmas, I think I came up with the idea. I mean, it's been a long time in planning, but I really started developing the content for my online course. And I think really, to do that and have those platforms available to help you create that content, you can really deliver so much value to a much wider audience. And it's one of the reasons why my next season, coming up, season 4 on the podcast, it's all about being a teachpreneur, and how to take those steps into that online environment where you can start creating valuable content, you can start creating online courses, and having a much wider impact. So from a teaching point of view, I think it will happen much sooner, and it's definitely already begun. I just think, from an education point of view, they'll just be a bit slower on the uptake.
Yeah, and I think the great thing about that is the fact that you have in one way, you've got an audience of thousands and or millions, with people that could listen to the podcast and have access to it. But at the same time, the content that you create is very personal, because you create this content based on your experiences and what you know that your students need and what really works. So it's sort of both sides of the coin, really, but sort of far-reaching. That personal thing to you, and knowing exactly what it is that you want to get across, but at the same time being able to reach millions of people around the world.
And the thing is, if you take you, for example, Mark, you've got a specific style of teaching. Your expertise is in music. You could take that content and deliver it in a packaged way to help other people, even if it's teachers, to learn how to deliver content in a more effective way in their classroom. You've got a specific skill that potentially somebody else doesn't have. So you can package that content up, and you can distribute that value. And I think that is really, really important, really helpful. And like you said, you've got your own personal style, and that will automatically transition through the content that you create.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that in a nutshell really is how Education on Fire came about. I was delivering some of this sort of content online through various different sources, and people were saying, "Oh, can you show me a bit more, literally the nuts and bolts? How do I get children to be engaged in music from the most basic way? How do they sit? How do I need to speak to them? What do I need to get them to do? Just sort of basic sort of rhythm games and clapping games and that sort of thing." And I thought, well, that's something that I just do every day. That's not a particularly big deal to me. And I thought, well, if that's sort of my specialist and what I know, there must be other people in different schools doing the same type of thing in their world, but in a different subject. And so it's just a question of you really sort of sharing those experiences in those different disciplines in a really sort of real life position in a particular school, or a different way of doing it, and just take those actionable tips and being able to implement that in a very simple way within your environment. And yes, what you said is absolutely true. Exactly, that's exactly why we did it. And yeah, if you go to educationonfire.com, you can see some of those initial rhythm games videos that are all there, and if you sign up to the newsletter, you will get some downloadable content as well that just supports those videos, and it just give you some really sort of basic starting blocks to sort of build music in your school. And I think that's going to be really important as we move on, as music education funding sort of seems to be less and less. What you can do as an individual teacher on a daily basis or a weekly basis is really supporting the children emotionally, I think, and just the arts generally are just a really key thing to give them that rounded education, which, while it's great if you've got a specialist teacher that can do it, but there are still things that you can do in your classroom every day. And I think if we can get some of this content, as you say, really easily available in different disciplines, I think that's going to be beneficial for everybody.
And the thing is, you've got the unique experience of, you have that daily insight. So you're doing it. You've got the experience, and you can deliver that to other people. So I think you're really taking the right steps. And professionally for yourself, you will develop so much. I mean, if I think about the journey that I've been on over the last 2 years, it's just, you could not get that professional development anywhere else. It just, it just doesn't exist. It's not just the educational development that, you kind of get to grips with, and you're listening to advice from other people, and it really challenges you. I mean, that is just phenomenal, the amount of content that you can receive just by listening to a podcast, or, from my point of view and your point of view, interviewing a specialist about that content is so valuable. But, the other side of it, Mark, is, as you're experiencing putting content together in a way that people want to listen to, and the process behind how you do that, and the systems, and how you get people to communicate and engage online in those educational communities. I mean, those are a whole array of skills that you would not even have if you hadn't taken the steps to start your podcast.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And interestingly, it comes from your your interest in and your passion. You know, it wasn't something I thought this is a strategic thing I ought to do. It's just something I felt like I really wanted to do, and just having that independence is just it's a great feeling, and it's very exciting because there's no obvious path of where it's going. I've got an idea of what I think and a vision of how I think it can develop, but it's going to be led by the people around me and also, you know, the community of people that get involved with the show, and that's a really exciting prospect, really.
Yeah, it's going to be such a journey, Mark. You're going to love it.
Brilliant, thank you. Um, One thing I'd like to just touch on just before we finish. I know you teach in a secondary school, so sort of from ages 11, 12 plus, and my more expertise is in the primary sector, and I'm on the National Council of NAPE, the National Association for Primary Education, and they do sort of birth up to age 13. And I just want to touch on that transition between the primary school and the secondary school, and how you feel that works. And I'd be really interesting just to talk in more depth at another time about that. But just how the handover between the two types of schools works, and any sort of development of that, which you think would be a positive thing especially for the children. Or I often feel when they get to the end of their primary, they get to age 11. They know everybody. They're very confident often because they've been to school a long time, and then they arrive at secondary school, and then all of a sudden they're the youngest there. They don't know what's going on, and I think that sometimes they get some mixed messages. It's kind of, now you're grown up and you're in big school and you have to kind of be independent and find your own way, which I completely understand. But at the same time, it's also at that point they need some real support and almost sort of mentorship just to kind of enable them to do that. And I feel sometimes they just get a little bit sort of left in the middle there somewhere.
I think that definitely comes down to a whole school approach. I think there are a number of different things going on there with that transition. I mean, the biggest thing is communication is really key. I think the communication between the primary school and the secondary school, naturally there'll be a transition of information regarding each child, so that transition needs to happen. But I also think, you know, the letting parents know what the expectation is when the child comes to school. You know, what kind of environment are they going to be bringing their child into? You know, what are the rules and the boundaries? And also, you know, from a pastoral point of view, it depends on the systems in place within your school. But from a school point of view, your pastoral side needs to be very strong. And I think, you know, specifically within my school, it's very, very good at welcoming the children into our community. And it's a case of not just providing a year head figure to you know, represent them and show them the way, but also, you know, from a tutor point of view, that the tutors are well informed about each individual child, that there is good communication as to what are the needs of that child. But, you know, we're also very good at taking our peer supporters, so maybe our prefects, children that are volunteering themselves to support and help other children within the school. You know, those people will come forward and will put in a system of, you know, guiding them around the school, showing them where they're going to go, so they get picked up at the start of a lesson, they get taken to their next lesson, they get taken to their lunchtime. So, you know, there's a significant period of time where the children are essentially guided around the school, and they are provided with a peer supporter that looks like them, you know, somebody that they can speak to if it feels a bit overwhelming and a bit daunting to approach your year head, for example. And, you know, for me, I'm also a tutor. So my current year sevens, we've had a group of peer supporters in regularly visiting the children, but they have continued that experience forward. And by doing that, what they do is every Friday they come in to see the tutor group, and we play little games. They talk to them about how everything's going, and it really builds that kind of you know, that real sense of community, and the feeling that they can quite easily go and approach somebody if they need to. So I think there's a number of things that help to make that transition smooth. It's definitely communication with the child, with the parent, you know, with the tutors. It's making them feel that they can go to speak to somebody, that they are seen as an individual, because the transition from 30 pupils in a classroom that you're with all of the time to, being in different classes with different people. I mean, that's a lot to get your head around, especially if you're a child that isn't very confident. So, pairing children up with other students if they're feeling less, confident, or they need some assistance. I think knowing the individual needs of the child is really important at that transition point, because then you can kind of put them in the best possible position to start secondary school and in a positive ways. Because I see it all the time. Some children, they're so keen to get to school. They're desperate to get out of primary school. They're the oldest in their school. It feels a bit, to some children, a bit babyish, and they're ready for that step. And yet for others, it's massively daunting. So depending on where you're on that spectrum, from a school point of view, you really need to understand where that child is so that you can support them as best as possible.
It sounds like you've got a really good setup at your school, and just as you're talking now, I can see a whole season coming together of talking to some of the children in the summer, sort of with their sort of ideas of what secondary school's like, and then sort of following them through into their first few weeks of secondary school in their whole experience. I think that'd be a really interesting thing to do. So maybe that's something we can discuss at another time and see if we could set something like that up.
Definitely. I mean, one thing that definitely kind of jumps out for me is the whole independence thing, teaching them to independently not only control themselves, but, really think for themselves and take action. I think that is an area where, I spend a lot of time working with children, because they don't often have those skills. They've been very nurtured, which they should be. But now going to secondary school, it's broadening your horizons. It's thinking about you as an individual, and how you kind of self-regulate yourself, how you self-motivate yourself, how you think about, independence and self-study and thinking deeply about content. So those are all new skills that they need to learn. And I think, sometimes that transition can be tricky, but as long as you're, providing that pathway in a secure environment where you're teaching them how to do that, and then gradually taking those support networks away, in a sense, from a learning point of view, so that they then flourish and become an independent learner. I think that's really crucial.
It sounds great, and like I said, I think there's definitely some mileage there for some follow-up work. So I'll look forward to really getting my head around how that could be. I think that would be a great thing to do. Well, Kelly, thanks so much for being on the show this week. It's been really interesting and really enjoyable chatting to you. Can you just leave us with some information on how people can get in contact with you, and where they can find your podcast, and how they can get all the great content and information that you're sharing with everybody?
Oh, thank you, Mark. It's been a real pleasure, and I'm really here to support you. So thank you for letting me come on your show. So you can reach me in two places. I'm inspirationforteachers.com. That's where you can find my podcast through my website. I'm on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, iHeartRadio. So everywhere that you can think to download a podcast, you can find the show there. And also my online revision system is myrevisionpal.com. So if you're looking to find an online revision system that teaches you exactly how to revise and what actually works from a scientific point of view, you can find that at myrevisionpal.com. And I'm all over social media, so give me a wave, say hello, please do connect, because I'm more than willing to provide help and support.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Kelly's brilliant at and being social and keeping in contact with everybody. You just have to drop her a line on Twitter or something, and she'll respond. And I think all of us in the podcast world, we really enjoy just that connection and that the feedback and just really hearing what you have to say and what's important to you. Yeah,
it's a really friendly community. So just reach out, because like you, Mark, we're willing to help, aren't we? Brilliant.
So thanks very much for being on the show. Thanks very much for listening, everybody. You can get the show notes and find out all the information on educationonfire.com, and really look forward to chatting to you again on the next show.
Thanks, Mark, and good luck.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Education on Fire podcast. For more information, please go to educationonfire.com.